And so it's unfortunately ironic that this movie was about the dog-eat-dog, horrible, cruel, sexist world of show business. And behind the scenes, that's exactly what was happening, right? Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne, published in 1966, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by Mark Robeson, which was released in 1967. And this won a book versus movie poll that I had posted, so thank you to everybody who voted in that poll. And I do a book versus movie poll on the 1st of every month, and January's poll is still happening right now. So if you're watching this video on January 6th, 2024 or 2025, then head over to my community page and cast your vote while you still have time. If you are watching this after January 6th, you still do not need to worry because, as I said, I post a new poll at the start of every month. So come February 1st, there will be another one. And I want to begin this video with a quote by the author because when this book was released, it was considered a dirty book, quote unquote. And so it was incredibly popular, and yet it was also like very scandalous to be seen reading this, you know? And it was also on a list of like the dirtiest books of 1966 or something. But Jacqueline Suzanne really pushed up against this idea of it being a dirty book. And about this, she said, "So many people seem unable to differentiate between the words shocking and dirty. Truth is often shocking. It is not dirty. Life is shocking at times. It is not dirty. People often confuse the words savage and dirty, violent and dirty. To me, something in print is dirty only if it is used for prurient reasons, if it is inserted without necessity to develop a character or plot. There is nothing in Valley of the Dolls that is dirty. There are plenty of savage chapters, there is violence and sometimes shock, but the world of show business is one of the toughest arenas of combat. And I write about it in Valley of the Dolls. It's all of those things. Savage, shocking, unfair, but not dirty." And Jacqueline Suzanne herself, she was in showbiz, like she wanted to become an actress. And so that is where a lot of this book comes from, is from what she witnessed and what she experienced as she herself was trying to make it in showbiz. And from here on out, I will be getting into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And there were a lot of changes made from book to movie, and so I think the best way to go about this video is to go through it character by character and share what happens to her in the book, and then get into her movie counterpart. And then once I'm done talking about the main characters, I will have some sections in the end just getting into some of the themes of the book. And as always, this is broken up into the timestamps down below, and you can hop around as you please. So I will begin with Anne, because in many ways she is the main character here, especially as far as the book is concerned, because we get the most sections for her character, and her story also bookends this novel as well. But she starts out living in a New England town called Lawrenceville, but she feels like she is being suffocated there. And when she is 20, she leaves to live in New York City. And she quickly gets a job working for a celebrity manager named Henry Bellamy. And one of the men who work at Bellamy's company is named Lion Burke, and he is very handsome, and Anne is instantly smitten. Lion is a player though, as everybody in the office knows, and nothing happens between he and Anne aside from just being friends and Anne harboring this crush on him. But also in the book, Anne begins dating a guy named Alan, who she thinks is a poor insurance salesman, and she's kind of iffy on him, but she is dating him out of pity in a lot of ways. However, one night he tells her, like, "I want to marry you, and guess what? I'm not a poor insurance salesman. I am actually the son of a multimillionaire." And like I said, Anne was iffy with him to begin with, and once she gets caught up in the whirlwind that is his real life, she likes it even less. And she's just like, wait, this is way too much. Like, not only are you not who I thought you were, like now you want to marry me. And when she tries to tell him that she doesn't want to marry him, he and his father just won't listen. And this part of the book felt like a stress dream because she is trying to communicate to the people around her what she wants and what she feels and how she feels about the situation they're in and how she doesn't want to marry Alan. And yet it's like the people do not even hear what she is saying, and they are just pushing her towards this life without any thought whatsoever on what Anne wants, because they are just ignoring every resistance she has to this idea of marrying Alan and quitting her job and having babies, and they're just planning her entire future out for her. And later, when she is talking to Alan privately, she's trying to use this time to tell him, like, I do not want to marry you. And we read, "We'll set a date then," says Alan. "No, Alan, I always get what I want, Anne, and I want you. I want you to love me, and you will. Now, no, not another word until Christmas. And so yeah, just an example of how entitled and sexist these people are, thinking like, oh, like I just get what I want and now I want you. Not only does he want her, he wants her to love her. And he's like, and I always get what I want. So eventually you'll just love me because I always get my way. And not seeing women as their own beings with their own thoughts and feelings that might not align with their thoughts and feelings. However, Anne is able to stall the wedding and be like, I'm not ready for this right now. And he's like, okay, we'll wait like 6 months or whatever. And so she also continues working at the Henry Bellamy Company. However, she and Lyon eventually have to go out of town for a show, and the two of them end up having sex. And this is Anne's first time because she had been a virgin. And the fact that she is a virgin comes up a lot in the book and just how people treat her because of that. And there's a part where, when Lyon finds this out, he hadn't expected it. And so he's kind of taken aback. And so then they're in the bathroom arguing about the fact that she had never done it before. And she thinks like, wow, like we're standing here arguing about something that was supposed to be so special and sacred in a way, right? And yet these people in New York treat her like, what? Like, why haven't you done it yet? Like, what's taking you so long? Come on. But anyway, so that was an interesting part of the book too. But yeah, so she and Lyon, from here, the two of them begin a relationship, and she officially just ends things with Alan for good. And Lyon, he does have his good moments. For example, the book begins in 1945 and he has just come back from the war. And so after that experience, he's like, I don't want to let life pass me by. Like, I'm not going to take it for granted anymore. I'm going to appreciate every moment, which of course, is a great sentiment to have. But also there's a part when they're out at a restaurant and she doesn't like to drink. And so she's saying how she feels like people judge her when she doesn't drink. And she goes on to say, I feel even the waiters stare at me with disapproval. Anne says, then stare right back. Never let anyone shame you into doing something you don't choose to do. Keep your identity. But despite his good moments, ultimately though, he is still very selfish and is yet another entitled man in this story. And one night she doesn't go home with him because her friend needs her, and he is just super pouty about this and he just leaves her behind. And then later, when they are both in Lawrenceville because Anne's relatives have died, her mom and her aunt, and so she is back in Lawrenceville in her home just tying up these legal loose ends and trying to get the house sold, when he says that he loves the house and he loves Lawrenceville and that they should live in this house together. And she has been wanting to marry him, but he has resisted because he's like, I need to work on my book and that's not going to bring in enough money. And I'm not going to live off of your money. Like, I need to be the one supporting us. And so therefore, since I can't support us, we can't be together, which kind of feels like a lame excuse, especially I'm trying to put myself in the 60s because at the time, I guess this wasn't so unusual to think this way. But anyway, it feels like he's just coming up with an excuse not to settle down and commit fully to Anne. But then when he's in Lawrenceville, suddenly he's like, oh, okay, like I'll marry you, but we have to stay in Lawrenceville. And so it always is on his terms, right? Regardless of how Anne feels. And in the book, we feel so deeply how much Anne hates Lawrenceville and how like to move back to this town, to move back into this house, it like just goes against every fiber of her being. Like she just hates the idea so much. And so because we know how important it is to Anne not to be in Lawrenceville, this part in the book, I was just like, oh, like please don't give in. Please don't move back to Lawrenceville just for Lyon. Like please don't do it. And thankfully she doesn't. She tells him no, like she just can't do that. But once again, Lyon gets super pouty because he's not getting his way. And that night he just leaves town and she is left with a letter from him telling her that he has moved back to England because in the book he is British. And so he's like, I've gone back to England to work on my book full time. And don't sit around waiting for me because I won't be waiting for you, so don't wait for me. And Anne is of course heartbroken, but soon after this, she is offered the job of being the face of a popular makeup brand and she agrees, and soon she also begins a relationship with the makeup company founder, Kevin Gilmore. And they end up being together for 15 years, albeit they're a mundane 15 years though. But then eventually Lyon returns to New York and he has come to see Anne, and Kevin is insanely jealous, of course, but Anne still chooses to see him, and there's drama between them because Kevin is jealous and Anne is trying to choose which guy she wants to be with. And ultimately, Kevin makes the choice really easy because he shows her a horrible side of himself, and so she dumps him and gets with Lion. However, Lion, when he returned to New York, it was only supposed to be temporary. It was just a temporary writing assignment. However, Anne is able to get him new writing assignments to extend his stay. And then her final plan, Henry Bellamy is going to be retiring. And so she tells him, like, when you retire, put Lion in charge. And she like buys him out because Anne is very wealthy at this point. And so she's also, like buying Henry out or something in order to get him to hire Lion. And so this works. And Henry tells Lion, like, I believe in you. You're the only one I can give my company over to. And so Lion is so flattered and he's like, oh, wow, like I can't say no to this opportunity. Look how much Henry believes in me. When really it's not that Henry believes in him. It's that Anne is playing puppet master and orchestrating this whole thing. But yeah, ultimately it works. Lion gets the job without realizing Anne is behind it. However, eventually he does find out and he is furious. But by this point, she is married to him and she is pregnant with their baby. But then during her pregnancy and after the baby is born, Lion then begins an affair with Neely, who is a character I will be talking about soon. However, when Anne goes to Henry, who at this point has become a close confidant of hers, she tells him that Lion is cheating on her with Neely, but Henry tells her, act aloof, pretend you don't know, act like everything is normal, and believe me, eventually Lion will return. And eventually Neely does show Lion her true colors because she can be very controlling and selfish. And so when her true colors are revealed to Lion, Lion does indeed return to Anne and all is well. However, it is not a sweet victory for Anne, and ultimately by the end of the book, Lion has begun an affair with another woman, and Anne knows this and she realizes, like, there will always be another woman and each time it will hurt less and less, but then also my love for him is also going to become less and less as time goes on, and she just kind of accepts that is her future, and that is how the book ends. So to move on to movie Anne, so as in the book, she leaves her small town in New England to live in New York City. She gets a job with Henry Bellamy. She meets Lion. Their relationship is sped up a bit here in the movie, of course, but eventually they start dating. Then we have the scene in Lawrenceville where he wants to stay there and she tells him no, and so then he leaves. Then she gets the job at the makeup company. I guess she starts dating the Kevin Gilmore movie version, but he is given very, very little screen time here. And the storyline with her dating Alan and the stuff with Alan's dad as well, none of that is in the movie. And then as in the book, Lion eventually returns. However, in the movie, Lion returns because Henry is retiring and he has offered his company to Lion. So in the movie, Lion takes over Henry's job, but Anne has nothing to do with it. Like, I was so frustrated by that change in the movie that Anne, she orchestrated the whole thing in the book, and yet in the movie, Henry genuinely wants Lion to take over the business. So I was very frustrated with that change. But yeah, so he returns and they begin a relationship yet again. However, they do not get married and they do not have a baby like they do in the book, but he does begin an affair with Neely. And from here, it's the same where Anne starts taking pills during this time because she is so stressed out. And then when he is done with Neely, he does return to see Anne, who at this point in the movie has moved back to Lawrenceville because she was, super strung out on pills because she started taking them while Lion was having the affair. And in the movie, at one point, she's like, wow, I need to turn my life around because these pills are getting out of control. And then she leaves New York and goes back to Lawrenceville. So that is where she is now living when Lion comes to see her. However, in the movie, she turns him away, saying she doesn't want him anymore, and the movie ends with her walking in the woods of Lawrenceville, having turned over a new leaf, and has let go of her dream of New York and Lion. And so yeah, I already mentioned it, but I really dislike the change of Anne not having anything to do with Lion returning to New York. I loved how she ended up being so manipulative as she made this plan work out. And then also in the book, again, she is worth $1 million by the time Lion returns. And this is $1 million in the 50s or 60s at this point. So she's a very wealthy woman because she came from a wealthy family, but then when her aunt and mom died, she got even more money, and then Henry invests it for her. Plus, being the Gilmore Girl makeup brand spokesperson is very lucrative as well. So yeah, she is worth $1 million. So she's very wealthy. And they didn't have that in the movie either. And then ending the movie with her in Lawrenceville, book Anne, that was her worst case scenario, is returning returning to Lawrenceville. So I was kind of frustrated that they made that change too. And then also the ending of the book, it's just so bitter, but it's also so perfect. And so I wasn't surprised, but I was a little let down that they made it a more uplifting ending as far as Anne is concerned. I guess having all three be these downer endings would have just been too sad. So I guess they figured they needed to give someone a more positive end in the movie. And then also, yeah, like we see Lion tell her like, oh, I want to live in Lawrenceville with you. And she tells him no. But again, in the book, you felt how she was just like, oh, like, don't make me make this choice because I love you, but I hate Lawrenceville, you know? And so we just didn't feel that tension that she was feeling internally in this moment. We didn't feel that in the movie, really. Like, we didn't feel the stakes of what he was asking her. And then, yeah, like I said, she starts taking pills when he is cheating on her with Neely. And again, in the movie, she cleans herself up. But in the end of the book, she realizes like, wow, like these pills are going to be my friend for years to come because Lion is just going to continue doing this. And so the book ends with her accepting that this is the situation with the Lion and also accepting that she is going to keep taking pills. And now to move on to Neely. So in the book, Anne meets Neely because when she first moves to New York, they're both living in the same boarding house. And Neely is an up and coming actress who is only 17 years old. And because Anne works for Henry Bellamy, who is the manager for Helen Lawson, Anne is able to get Neely an audition for the Helen Lawson show due to this connection. And then there's a part where Helen Lawson wants this other woman cut from the play because this other woman is too good and Helen Lawson doesn't want the competition in her own show, you know, she doesn't want to be outshined. And so Helen wants this woman fired. And then Anne suggests that Neely take this woman's place because Neely, she wasn't someone who threatened Helen's ego. And so they agree to this and Neely gets an even bigger role thanks to Anne. And from here, Neely's career takes off and she eventually moves to Hollywood to be in movies. And she has an incredible voice while also being a fantastic actress. And she is nominated for multiple Oscars before eventually winning one. And she moved out to LA with a man she loved, but it does not take her long to feel like he is dragging her down. And so she gets rid of him and marries a clothing designer who had been rumored to be gay, but turns out he was bisexual. And she had been taking pills to help her lose weight. However, they make it hard to go to sleep. And so she's talking to Jennifer about this. And Jennifer tells her about the sleeping pills that she takes. And so pretty soon, Neely just has this cocktail of pills and alcohol in her system because she also has started drinking a lot too. And she and Ted, who is her second husband, they end up having twin babies. However, she's just never around because she is so busy with work and she's just always so tired all the time. Plus, she's drinking and taking pills. And in the book, she had caught him with other men before, but eventually she catches him with a woman who he ends up leaving Neely for. And so eventually Neely returns to New York, and at this point Anne is with Kevin, and Kevin tells Neely that she should do a TV special and his makeup brand can sponsor it and it will help boost her career because television is the new thing these days. And so she finally agrees to it, and this is like a huge deal, like so much is riding on this TV special, and yet it is just too complicated and too difficult for Neely to figure out and to deal with. And so right before the show is to begin, she takes a bunch of pills. That way she'll be knocked out and can't do the show because she feels like she can't do it. She doesn't have the confidence. And man, this part, like you feel the stakes of this show. And so when she decides to opt out and just take a bunch of pills, like, oh, the situations within this story just feel so real. And like I said, like you feel the stakes and you are so invested. And so, yeah, this TV special, when she just chooses to take the pills instead, like, oh, that was tough to read. But anyway, over time, she is living with Anne and she fakes a suicide attempt where she cuts herself. However, she cuts herself too deep and then she's worried she really will die. And from here, she then goes to the hospital because they find her in time. And she is eventually taken to a mental hospital under false pretenses. And she is upset to be there for a while before finally just giving in. And ultimately, it seems like it had been a positive experience for her, despite her resisting it at the start. And by the time she is finally released from the mental hospital, she has gained a lot of weight. However, she can sing again and she has her confidence back and she's off all of the pills and things. And so Lion, at this point, he is in charge of Henry Bellamy's company, and he and his partner, I mean, it's his partner's idea initially, but they're like, we need to sign Neely and we can get her career off the ground again, and it'll be great for her, and it'll be great business for us to be the ones who resurrect her career. And so they put her on tour, and it goes amazingly. And while on tour, Neely eventually starts to lose weight, and then she begins to have an affair with Lion, despite the fact that she and Anne have been longtime friends. But eventually, though, her controlling nature comes out, and this turns Lion off, and so he leaves her. And in the end of the book, it seems like Neely is just going to be stuck in this forever cycle, of wanting success and working hard for it. But then once she gets it, she self-sabotages, but then she cleans herself up, and then she gets the success again, but then she self-sabotages. So she is just continually in this cycle. Whereas in the movie, when we first meet Neely, she's already cast in the Helen Lawson play and had nothing to do with it. And in the movie, Neely is the up-and-coming actress who Helen feels is taking the spotlight from her. So Helen wants Neely to be fired for this reason. And so that is what ends up happening. And in the book, Neely being in the play is what kickstarts her career. Rather here, Lion feels bad for getting her fired. And so he helps her get some spots playing other places as a way to make up for it. And then this really boosts her career. And again, she ends up moving to LA where she becomes a huge star, but also gets hooked on pills and alcohol. And we have the same drama with her relationships in both book and movie. However, with her second husband, we do not have her giving birth to the twins like we saw in the book. And in the movie, she does go to the sanitarium, and what leads her there is because she takes a bunch of pills and overdoses. And so it's kind of similar to the book, but again, in the book, she had slit her wrists, whereas here it was the pills. And again, here the hospital turns out to be good for her, and afterwards her career is resurrected, and she and Lion begin an affair. But as in the book, he eventually drops her, and we leave her broken down and depressed, seemingly a washed up actress. And now to move on to Jennifer. So in the book, we first hear about her because Henry is her manager, and she is this beautiful young woman who has married a prince, but she wants an annulment. So Henry is helping her get the annulment while also helping her get a spot in Helen Lawson's play and also wanting to help her get into showbiz. And so this is how Helen, Jennifer, and Anne all meet, is all through this play, through Henry Bellamy. But I really like the scene where Anne and Jennifer really connect in the book, which is when Lion has abandoned Anne because he was all pouty. And then when she stayed there for Helen's sake, but then things go sour with Helen. And so Anne now is left with no one to turn to and nowhere to go, and she has no money. And so Jennifer invites her up to her room, and Anne tells her about everything going on. And Jennifer just, again, is instantly just like so warm and kind and helpful. But yeah, Jennifer herself at this point, she does not get into showbiz and instead begins a relationship with an up-and-coming singer named Tony, who is himself destined for Hollywood. However, he has a controlling sister who never leaves the two of them alone, and like hardly ever leaves them alone. And the sister is also very against them getting married. However, Jennifer is able to sneak she and Tony away from the sister long enough and are able to elope. And so then from here, all three of them move to Hollywood, where Tony is in movies while Jennifer is home alone and bored. And eventually she does become pregnant. However, things go sour between her and Tony because of Miriam. And so Jennifer goes to New York in the hopes that Tony will fly out to win her back and they can be rid of Miriam finally and they can just live their lives. However, Miriam is the one that comes to see Jennifer, and she tells Jennifer, "The reason I want you to get rid of the baby is not because I'm jealous, and it's not even for financial reasons, but rather it is because Tony has the brain of a 12-year-old essentially, and he can never think above that. And as time goes on, it will get worse and worse. But that is why Miriam never lets them alone for long, because she's worried Jennifer will catch on. And that is why Miriam handles everything, is because Tony doesn't have the mental capacity to do so. And so she's like, yeah, like right now we can kind of get by without people realizing, but eventually it'll get so bad that he needs to be in a mental hospital. And so that is why you need to get rid of the baby, because this is a genetic disease. And by the way, Jennifer does notice that when she's alone with Tony, she's like, man, like, he's not very smart. And the ways he acts sometimes, she's just like, she can tell something is off. But yeah, Miriam just confirms it by being like, yeah, like mentally he's 12 years old. But yeah, so Jennifer, she does get rid of the baby, and then she and Tony divorce. And then from here, a French filmmaker reaches out to her with an offer to make nudie movies in France, which she agrees to do. And then years later, she returns to the US to be in American movies. And during this time, she meets a politician, and the two of them seem to truly be in love. However, she starts having medical issues, and so she goes to see a doctor, and she finds out that she can never have children, which throughout this book, she wants so badly to be a mother. And she has finally met this politician, and she's like, oh, Like, I can have the family of my dreams, essentially. However, when she goes to see the doctor, so yeah, he breaks it to her that she cannot have children anymore. And then also turns out she has breast cancer and she needs a mastectomy. And so she has the politician come see her in the hospital, but she doesn't tell him any of the diagnosis. And so when he shows up, she reveals to him, like, I can never have babies. And he tells her, like, you know what, that's fine. Like, we can adopt. It doesn't matter. Like, I love you and your breasts. Those are my babies. Those are what really matter to me. It's fine if you can't give birth to babies. And so after this, she doesn't tell him that she has breast cancer and that she needs a surgery. And instead, once he leaves, she then commits suicide rather than going through with the surgery, feeling like her body is too tied to her identity and fears that if she doesn't have breasts, the politician won't love her anymore. Whereas in the movie, right at the start, we see Jennifer and she is cast in the Helen Lawson play. And we again see her get in a relationship with Tony, who again has an over-controlling sister. And here Tony is mentally and physically fine at first, but we find out that he has a disease that will slowly eat away at his physical and mental health. And so once again, Jennifer gets pregnant, but then when she finds out about his condition, she gets an abortion. She does stay married to him though, and she gets the job in France as a way to pay Tony's medical bills. And by the way, in both book and movie, Neely runs into Tony when she is staying at the sanitarium because they are both in the same facility. But yeah, after doing the French films, she then comes back to America. And this is when she once again finds out she has cancer. And here it seems one of the final things that make her take her life is when she gets a phone call from her mom, who's just demanding more money and doesn't care about Jennifer's well-being. And in the book, we knew that her mom was very demanding and very greedy and didn't care about Jennifer, just cared about Jennifer getting money. And so this was part of the book. But in the movie, this phone call with her mom is what really pushes her to commit suicide, where again, in the book, it was the politician and what he said about her breasts. That is what really got her to do it in the book. But regardless, she ends up overdosing on pills. And in the movie, as she does this, we see a montage of the romantic moments between her and Tony. And I didn't like the changes they made to the relationship with her and Tony here. For one, the fact that she stays married to him and is helping pay for the hospital bills. Like in the book, he, with his career and due to Miriam's savings, they didn't need Jennifer to help paying the bills. And then the fact that she just stays connected to him the whole time. I mean, I guess it's romantic, but I guess even in the movie, I had a hard time liking Tony because I just liked him so much in the book. And he just was not a good person. He was not a nice person. We see him force himself on Jennifer at least 2 times. And I know he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old, but still that doesn't make the way he treated her okay. And in the book, she does have her mom pressuring her to bring in more money, which is one reason she does the French films. But also, she was just very open about her body and proud of her body and felt fine being naked on film. Whereas in the movie, it bothers me that she needed to pay the medical bills because it makes it seem like, oh, the only reason she would stoop this low is because she was in dire circumstances, right? Like that's kind of the implication. I just don't like that messaging, and I preferred in the book where she makes this choice of her own free will, basically. And it isn't as tragic as it is played in the movie. She just wants to make money, and if this French guy is willing to pay her good money, that's fine by her, you know? And so again, the movie making it seem like, oh, like she has to do this to pay these bills. It's like taking away her agency in the choice in some ways, because it's like, oh, she wouldn't have done this if it hadn't been for this very specific situation, you know? And so, yeah, anyway, I just prefer the messaging of the book. And then the movie also cuts a segment we see from Jennifer when she is in her late teens and she is going to school in Europe, and she meets a woman who she begins a relationship with. However, the woman ends up being pretty demanding and controlling as the years go by. And so Jennifer, she is able to leave Europe and return to America, and she is able to lose contact with this woman. But I also need to talk about Helen Lawson here, because in both, she is an older star who only works on Broadway, but she is a powerhouse of a performer. And when Neely first meets her in the book, Neely was part of a 3-person act, and Neely is the one who gets cut. But it wasn't anything personal. It was like, we just don't need you. We just need the 2 guys. And so this is when Anne gets Neely recast in a background part. But then again, Anne also helps her get the bigger role. Whereas, yeah, in the movie, this isn't the case. And rather, Neely is the one already in the bigger role to begin with. And so Helen Lawson is envious of her because she is so talented. And so Neely is the one that Helen Lawson has be fired from the play. And in the book, Anne becomes very close with Helen, and it is when Anne is dating Alan, and Helen tries to get set up with Alan's father, and she is like so hung up on him and imagining like, oh, like we're gonna get married, it's gonna be so amazing. But the father tires of Helen very quickly, and he wants to drop her and tries to get Anne's help and being like, oh, like I'm not interested in her, can you tell her to leave me alone? And Anne, she keeps telling people that Helen is really a soft, sensitive person who just wants to be loved, while everyone else just sees her as a difficult, selfish star. And while Anne finds out that Helen can be pretty vicious and their relationship does come to an abrupt end, it is still true that Helen wanted to be loved. And we hear in the book how she got married multiple times, and each time she would leave her career and go off to live with this man. However, it never lasted because Broadway and being a star and the applause, it was too much a part of her, and also just being a performer and singing. And so ultimately the relationship would never last and she would return to Broadway. And there's a part where Neely says, like, the touch of the man you love is nothing compared to the applause of an audience, right? And so they just get so hooked on that. But yeah, I thought it was interesting how everybody in the book treats Helen so horribly. And yes, there is that side of her where she can be like a very difficult, diva and be very selfish and very demanding and very cutthroat. But she also was lonely and wanted to be loved. And she was sensitive, and yet so many people they dehumanize her, right? Especially all of the men involved. They don't see her as a fellow human being. They just see her as this this annoying lady who is so rude and selfish and is so difficult. But also in the movie, something to go along those lines kind of, there's a part where Neely says, like, if a man refuses to do a lousy scene, they say he's dignified. But if a woman refuses to do a lousy scene, she's labeled as being difficult. And so just the double standards that are there. But then also there is the bathroom scene between Helen and Neely when they get into a fight, and Neely pulls Helen's hair only to realize she wears a wig. And in the movie, this was more warranted, I guess you could say, because Helen did have Neely fired, right? Because she was jealous of her. And so you can understand why Neely is so upset. And yet at the same time, at this point, Neely is successful, right? Like, let it go. That's all in the past. But it was almost even worse in the book because Helen never had Neely fired for personal reasons like that. And so she just took it too far when she tried to flush the wig down the toilet. I thought that was very messed up of Neely. But that scene in the movie is just so iconic. But then I also wanted to mention the friendship between the three main characters, because in the book, we understand why they are friends and we see them connecting, and we even see the three of them become roommates at one point before Neely moves to LA. Whereas in the movie, you don't really understand why they're so close. Why do they remain friends through the years? Like, you don't really feel that bond. And so I missed that as well. And then also it's interesting because the book begins in 1945 and then it ends in 1965, 66. And yet the movie seems to all take place in the 60s. And speaking of the time and place, we see time and time again the sexism that existed at this time. And when Alan is upset at Anne, at one point he tells her, "This is a man's world. Women only own it when they're very young. You'll find that out someday." And then you have one of Helen's husbands talking about her as if she is something to be owned, and we read, "There she would play her greatest role, her final role, that of a wife." The big smiling husband, Red Ingram, also assured the press that Helen's place was on his ranch. "I never saw this little girl in any of her shows," he told the world. "Just as well. I might have nipped her career long ago. She's for me." And even though Anne, especially in the movie, she can be seen as the boring one in a lot of ways, but I did admire her staying true to her dreams, right? Both by not marrying Alan, but also not by staying in Lawrenceville for Lion. But I did want to say that she does come from a rich family, like not as rich as Alan's, but still, like she wasn't poor or desperate. And if she were, maybe she wouldn't have been able to refuse the chance to marry a millionaire. So coming from a well-off family and feeling secure in that way gives you the freedom to stick to your principles. Whereas Neely and Jennifer, they came from very different childhoods, and so I do think that contributed to where each one ended up. And then also with Kevin Gilmore, that was so frustrating because, for like 15 years or so, Anne was wanting to marry him, but he didn't want to marry her. And then when he finally decides he does want to get married, the wedding date keeps being postponed for reasons dealing with Anne's life, and he gets so huffy about it because now that he's ready to be married, he wants to get his way and get his way right now, even though Anne has been waiting for 15 years, right? And yet he's so impatient and he's like, well, now I want to get married, so we don't need to wait anymore. Like just how every how basically every man in this book, he just wants what he wants and he sees no reason why he shouldn't be able to get what he wants. And when you consider like, well, maybe you can't get it because another person is involved and they need to be okay with it. Like that doesn't even occur to them. They're like, oh, like this is what we want. So she'll just go along with it. Like who cares what she has to say? And this brings up the title of the book because, you know, the title Valley of the Dolls, they call the pills dolls. And so that is what the title is referring to. But with the book, I also thought that the title referred to how men want women to be beautiful, stay looking young forever, not be outspoken, and allow themselves to be controlled by others. Because every one of these men basically want women who are dolls and not real people at all with real opinions and real emotions. But I feel like this theme is definitely more prominent in the book than it had been in the movie. But I also wanted to mention the real life inspirations because I don't know about Anne, but Jennifer and Neely were based on real people. So Jennifer is based heavily on Marilyn Monroe, though her marrying a prince, that is something Grace Kelly did. But regardless, Monroe was beautiful and full-figured and was also very warm and genuine, and she got along great with other women, which is the case with Jennifer as well. She was seen as a sex symbol. She was involved with a politician. It is rumored that she had several abortions despite her desire to be a mom, and then she ended up dying from pills. Whereas Neely is very much like Judy Garland, which Judy Garland was originally cast as Helen Lawson, and she shot at least one scene. However, the director apparently was just a horrible person, and he was so messed up to Judy Garland, and he purposefully was trying to get her fired, and he succeeded. And then also he apparently was so messed up to Sharon Tate, and he just treated her terribly, even though Tate, from what I've read, was nothing but sweet and kind, and yet he just tormented her on this set. And so it's unfortunately ironic that this movie was about the dog-eat-dog, horrible, cruel, sexist world of show business. And behind the scenes, that's exactly what was happening, right? But anyway, so yeah, Garland was originally cast in this role, even though she knew Neely was based on her, right? Which isn't flattering, but she was desperate for money, so she accepted the role, and then ultimately she was fired. But anyway, Judy Garland, she was a child performer like Neely. She had a great talent, but also struggled with alcohol and pills. She also spent time in a sanitarium, and she also had suicide attempts. And in general, like despite her being so talented and beloved by audiences, she just lived such a difficult, sad life. And when it comes to book versus movie, I will just cut to the chase and say that the book wins. I did enjoy the movie and I would recommend it, but the book just has so many more layers, and I think the women are better represented in the book as well. And then the book ending, again, is just so bitter and so sad, and yet it's just perfect. It's a perfect ending. However, I will say with the movie, Patty Duke was incredible and she eats up every scene. I loved her in this. And though in the movie, she's far more boring here, unfortunately, than she had been in the book. And then Sharon Tate, she is good as Jennifer, but her character too just felt like she had more going on in the book than she did in the movie. And then also the director, I think he was just a bad director from what I've read. And so he wasn't giving them much to work with, or he was just giving them bad advice, and he was using poor tactics in order, like he would have a stopwatch, I heard, and he would be like, okay, this scene should take 90 seconds, and he would count and make sure they got it in that 90 seconds rather than just letting it happen like they were so regulated. And so yeah, anyway, he just seemed like a bad director as far as this movie is concerned. And so some complaints I have with their performances, I feel like it's not really the actress's fault, and rather it's probably the fault of the director being bad at his job. But then also Sharon Tate, she was horribly murdered 2 years after this, and so you can't help but think of that too while you watch this, and so that just adds another layer of sadness to this movie based on the real life of this woman. But yeah, having said all of that, I would still recommend the movie. I could see myself potentially watching it again. And again, I love the performance by Patty Duke in particular. I thought she had some of the best scenes, without a doubt, very entertaining. But ultimately, I still preferred the book, and that wins when it comes to Valley of the Dolls. So thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you to everybody who voted, and share your thoughts down below on this book and movie, and I will see you next time. Bye.